Part 3. Pictures of Auschwitz. Chapter 10. Father sits with his legs astride me, holding on to me as if we were on a toboggan run. I hold on to the man in front of me in the same way. We are in an open boxcar, traveling by train. It is night. It is snowing. The wind is fierce, but the man in front of me is a large Pole, and I am quite protected. Father is not so lucky. I am too skinny to give him much protection from the elements. We were loaded onto these cars today, after 3 months in Auschwitz-Birkenau, and a long march away from the death camp. It is the middle of December. I slept most of the day, but now the cold and the terrible hunger keep me awake. We've had nothing to eat but a slice of bread and a cup of watery soup this morning. The Allies are advancing, the Russians are nearing Auschwitz, and the Germans are starting to evacuate the camp. We are being taken back to Germany, I suppose, so they can continue to use us for forced labor, and, of course, to kill us. They want to kill us not only because they hate and despise us, but also now because they want no one left to tell the world what happened. Then they can't be punished. But why do they think they'll be punished? After all, don't they believe that what they are doing is right? They are just eradicating a vile species, like cockroaches. Surely no one would punish them for that. But no, they are terrified. Does that mean that they knew all along it was wrong? And they did it anyway, some for the love of killing and for the love of power, some because they were simply following orders with which they agreed? I am more determined than ever to live. I will live, and I will bear witness against them. I will remember. I don't have my pictures anymore. Still, I can make pictures in my head. I will do that. And I will go over them now and organize these pictures, so that when the time comes to tell of what happened, I will tell it clearly. They will not defeat me. I hug Father's arms closer around my chest, and I will not let them defeat Father either. I will keep him alive with the last ounce of strength in my body. I have spent 2 train trips looking at pictures, and I will do the same on this one, even if all I have are the pictures in my head. I remember how confused I was on that first trip, how terrified on the second. Now, I am simply a ball of anger and fury and determination. If I die, it won't be without a fight. Everything is in pictures for me now, as if I were clicking with my camera every time I saw something. The most memorable picture of those months is the one of Erica. Father was convinced that she and Mother had gone straight to the gas chambers. I kept telling him that we couldn't be sure. For 4 weeks we were kept in quarantine. We were actually in the part of the camp called Birkenau. Auschwitz had 3 major camps: Auschwitz I, Auschwitz II, or Birkenau, and Auschwitz III, or Monowitz. Auschwitz I was the main camp. It was built of red brick buildings and housed much of the camp administration, plus some barracks for political prisoners of many nationalities. Birkenau had the gas chambers and crematoria. After you entered the gate, on the left was the women's camp. On the right were the men's camp, the quarantine camp, the Theresienstadt family camp, the gypsy camp, and the prisoners' hospital. Behind all of this was Canada, as we called it, a group of storehouses containing all the loot stolen from prisoners as they arrived. Mountains of shoes, coats, clothes, shaving brushes, even artificial limbs, all to be sorted and shipped back to Germany. Monowitz was a labor camp, where German firms forced inmates to work in synthetic oil and rubber factories. Every barracks had a capo in charge, a prisoner, often a criminal, sometimes a Jew. Father made sure that the capo in charge of us knew of my skills with machinery and his skills as a carpenter and jack of all trades. When quarantine was over, some men were sent to build more barracks in Birkenau. The Nazis were so deluded, many still believed they could win, and then, of course, they'd need more room for Hitler's enemies from all over Europe. Father and I were sent to Monowitz to work in one of the factories there. Because, you see, even as they were building more barracks for prisoners, They were dismantling the machinery at the factories and sending it back to Germany so the Russians wouldn't capture it. They weren't thinking straight at all, but what could you expect from them? I suppose the businessmen at the factories knew the true story and were anxious to save their precious machines. These men and their businesses thrived on slave labor, just as the pharaohs had in Egypt when they used Jewish slaves to build their pyramids. Still, even the pharaohs hadn't attempted the destruction of an entire people. One of the first things you noticed in Auschwitz was the music. Bands of inmates were forced to play outside, as prisoners were marched to work or to their deaths. There was always music. Happy marching songs, waltzes. Still, this music didn't inspire. This music mocked. Father and I were put in a barracks with 800 other men. 3 of us had to share one straw pallet. There wasn't room even to turn over. Quarantine had been a nightmare. We lay together all night on the cold floor, not an inch between bodies. At 4:30 a.m. they would beat us and kick us out into the freezing cold of the field outside. There we would stand, sometimes for 3 or 4 hours, until every single person, not just in our barracks, but in the entire camp, was counted. If you fell or tripped, you were whipped or shot. They had to make sure that not one inmate would escape the fate planned for him by the Germans. Not one. No one was allowed inside during the day. The sun blazed down on us and we were desperate for water, but there was none to drink. Only the midday soup, which was almost all water. We didn't even have our own bowls or spoons to eat with. 5 of us would have to share a bowl of soup, passing it from person to person, 1 sip for each, until it was finished. Conditions in the new barracks were little better. We were given a ration of bread and margarine and a teaspoon of jam every few days. But we had a brutal capo who beat and terrorized us at every opportunity. Father and I had to march 4 miles to work every morning. And when we marched, the band would play. Of course, you were not to look at anything as you marched, or you'd be beaten. But that first morning, something made me look up at the band, which sat slightly back from the road. And there she was, little Erica, playing a violin. She looked pale and almost like a skeleton, and I could see she was coughing. I could also see that she'd given up. Her eyes were hollow, empty. She thought we were dead, I knew it. Before I could think of what to do, we were past her. Father was marching behind me, and I dared not turn around to tell him. When we got to the factory at Monowitz, we were separated. I was put to work in a large rubber factory, dismantling equipment. Working in the place was like a nightmare. The factories in Lodz seemed like heaven in comparison. Workers were beaten, whipped, or shot for not performing up to standard. SS men screamed, swore, shouted. It was chaotic and wild. And in the midst of all this, men in pressed brown business suits walked, stepping over dead bodies as if they were rags, checking with the foremen on progress, and giving direction. Mostly Hungarian Jews made up my work squad. We couldn't understand each other, but it really didn't matter. My mind was on doing my work so I wouldn't get into trouble, and figuring out a way to see Erica. She hadn't noticed me, I was sure of that. I'd have to get her attention without attracting that of the guards. It was strange. Frankfurt after the Nazis took over had seemed like a nightmare compared to the way it had been before. And Lodz had seemed like a nightmare compared to Frankfurt. And now, every minute in this hell, looking at the chimneys constantly belching smoke and fire, knowing that people like myself, children, mothers, were going up in flames, this was worse than anything I could imagine. Was there more? Could it get worse? I didn't think so. What could be worse than mass murder? But I was afraid that I had not yet hit bottom. I was afraid that the Nazis could prove to me that even this was not the worst. If only I could write Erica a note, I thought. But I had no paper, and if you were caught stealing the least thing, you would be shot. Then I had an idea. I went to the capo in charge of our unit and asked for a rag to oil down the machine I was working on. He found me one, and a small vial of oil. When he wasn't looking, I bit into the cloth and ripped it in half. It was filthy and disgusting, and I had to spit many times to clean my mouth out. Then I dipped my finger into some black grease from the machine I was working on. I wrote on the cloth, D and F, alive. That's all I had room for. Then I had to figure out how to hide it. Our striped pajamas had no pockets. After all, what would we own that would call for pockets? We had nothing. Still, my pants were held up by string because they were too wide. I tucked the cloth into the string at my waist. The day dragged by. For lunch, we were served soup made out of nettles. How did they imagine we could continue to work for them with that kind of ration? But I suppose they didn't care. There were plenty more of us slaves, and when we got too weak, we'd be sent to the gas chambers and someone else would take our place. Finally, it was time to march back. I rejoined the group from our barracks, and we marched 5 abreast. I managed to get myself on the end of the line, with Father beside me. Until I saw him, I hadn't realized how uncomfortable I'd been with him gone. He was everything to me now, and I didn't like to be separated from him for a minute. "Father," I said as we marched. "Father, I saw Erica." He almost stopped. He stumbled. I grabbed him and kept him moving so our SS guard wouldn't notice. "Are you sure?" "She was playing in the band as we marched out. She doesn't look good, but she's alive. I've written her a note. I'm going to try to get it to her as we march by." "They'd kill you here for less than that, Daniel. Be careful." "I will." We marched on in silence. Still, how could I get it to her without the SS guards noticing? Slowly, I took it out and began to fold it as we walked. I folded it carefully into smaller and tighter squares until it was only a tiny ball. We had been working since 6 a.m. It was now 6 p.m., and we were being forced to march in step 4 miles back to camp. But I didn't feel it. For once, I wasn't tired. I wasn't hungry. I just thought about Erica. My heart pounded. I broke out in a sweat. I could hear the band. We got closer, and there she was in the second row, second from the end, playing. I waited until I was about 2 feet away, and then, with a flick of my wrist, I lobbed my missile. It hit her on the elbow. She looked up, puzzled, but dared not stop playing. I could see her eyes searching, and then we were past her. I swore at myself. It was stupid. She'd probably just think it was a piece of garbage. "I saw her," Father exclaimed. And then he started to weep. "Thank God. Do you think Mother, too, could be?" "Father," I said gently, trying to fight back my tears, trying to be strong for him as he had always been for me. "You know how sick Mother was." Yes, I know," he said. "The sick, the children, the old. They were the first for the ovens, because they couldn't work." And he continued to weep, for Mother, but also with relief that Erica was still alive. Chapter 11. The next morning as we marched by, I could see Erica scanning the crowd. I had made sure that I was on the side nearest her, and then her eyes lit on me. And that is the picture of little Erica I will always remember. She continued to play, but her face broke out into a smile, and as I marched past, also smiling, she played a few extra notes, just for me. Then she saw Father, and I saw the tears spill from her eyes. She never stopped playing, but in her eyes there was hope now, instead of emptiness and death. That was when I knew for certain that Mother was dead. Had Mother been alive, Erica would not have let herself sink into such despair. She must have believed she was the only one of us left. I wondered where she was staying and how I could get to see her. The train rattles on. It is dead of night now and cold. I think of the next picture. I don't want to think about it, but I must. It is the worst thing I have ever seen. Beyond nightmare, beyond belief. It is of bodies burning in pits because the crematoria weren't eliminating the bodies as quickly as the Nazis were gassing them. So they threw them into huge pits. I'd been slaving at the factory for about a week when a new worker was added to my group. It was Adam, a boy from our youth group in Lodz. I was delighted to see him. He was a big fellow, a Polish Jew who spoke Yiddish. On our lunch break, he motioned me over to him, and we sat slightly away from the others, our backs against a stack of wood. He spoke in a low voice. "Don't give up, Daniel. The Russians are close. And there's a resistance here. I'm part of it. I think you should be too. In fact, there's something very important that needs doing, and I think you're just the right person for the job." "Whatever it is, I'll do it," I declared. "Anything is better than sitting here like a helpless rabbit." "Right," he said. "I'll see what can be done." The next day he told me more. Hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews are being transported here, all to be gassed. Already some of the resistance have smuggled out people and a couple of photos to the outside. But we need more evidence. We must convince them that with a few bombs the gas chambers could be destroyed. And the Germans can't kill us at this rate. I'm told it's almost 25,000 a day, without the gas chambers. There are a ton of cameras in Canada. The storehouse complex was called Canada because it was bountiful and full of good things, just like the country the prisoners had named it after. I told my contacts about your camera in the ghetto, how you took pictures all those years without getting caught. They want you to take some pictures, of the gas chambers if we can manage it, otherwise of the fire pits where they're burning the bodies. A chill ran through me. I realized at once how dangerous this would be. And if something happened to me, who would look after Father? "I'd like to think about it," I replied. "Not for too long," Adam cautioned. "We'll have to do lots of planning." Once back in the barracks, I had to try to decide whether to tell Father or not. We were able to sneak a look at Erica twice a day then, and that morning Father had gotten away with tossing her a small ration of bread, first making sure the guard wasn't looking. I knew he wouldn't want me to take any chances. Still, I felt I owed it to him to tell him, in case I didn't come back from the mission. There was no privacy in the barracks, nowhere even to crouch, so we squatted just outside the building. "There's a resistance movement here," I told him, "and they know I'm a photographer. They want me to take some pictures. They'll smuggle them out in the hope they can convince the Allies that mass murders are actually taking place." For a moment, he didn't reply. When he did, his response shocked me. "You must do it, Daniel, if you want to. We are all just waiting to be sent to the gas chambers. They'll kill us one way or another. Maybe you can help stop it. I'll try. But you must let me help. I've got some contacts. I can make things in the factory and exchange them for things you could find useful, like a case to conceal the camera, and an ID that would show you to be a laborer who works in the Canada complex, or a capo. Someone who might legitimately have to be where you're going. Maybe even a new uniform." The next day, I told Adam I'd do it. The first thing they had to figure out was how to get me out of the work detail, so I could be where I had to be. For a week, I heard nothing from them. Then one day, Adam sat me down and explained the plan. "We'll do it on one of your days off," he explained. We were given 1 day off every 2 weeks. On that day, a capo from the barracks being built will ask you and your father and about 10 others to come on a work detail. The pits for burning bodies are through the woods parallel to the new barracks. You'll be given the camera at the barracks. You and 3 others will be ordered to carry some supplies from the building site to the pits. The SS guards at the pits will be told you're delivering it to help the burning. Somehow you'll have to take your pictures. Then you'll be marched to Canada because we want to get some pictures there of the mountains of goods. It should give the Allies some idea of what we're talking about. Especially helpful would be to get a picture of the hair. The women's hair is packaged and sent back to Germany. A picture of a mountain of hair in bags would be very useful. Adam spoke of these horrors in the most matter-of-fact way. "You talk of it so calmly," I commented with a shudder. And then he gave me a look I will never forget. I can't even describe it well. Only my camera could have captured it. It was a look that said, "I have seen more pain than I can deal with. Don't ask anything of me. I cannot give it." When we arrived on the transport, Adam said to me, "I had my little sister Anya by the hand. They tore her from me, and one SS man threw her over to another. She screamed for me, "Adam! Adam!" Then the SS man took her little body so she was face up, looking at him, and he raised his knee and broke her back like it was a stick. Then he threw her away on the ground. "I live only for revenge now," he added before he moved away. By the time the next free day came, I was in a general state of terrible anxiety mixed with excitement. For once, I was going to be able to do something. My father also seemed in better spirits. By then, he had managed to develop quite a secret trade. He manufactured spoons and knives at the foundry where he worked. It was dangerous, but he felt it was worth the risk. He bartered the utensils for 2 bowls, one for each of us, a nicely made cloth case that attached to my string belt under my top to hold the camera, and a new uniform so I could pass for a worker from the Canada complex, because they always looked clean and neat. We kissed each other that morning at the 4:30 roll call, and he wished me luck. At 5 a.m., orders came for our departure. A capo I had never seen took charge of us. He beat a few of us around the head, and he kicked Father savagely. I wondered if the plan was still on. Surely this couldn't be a resistance man. And if it was, I thought he played his part a bit too convincingly. It was not a long march from our barracks to the building site. We were given the job of lugging huge slabs of wood that sat in a large pile over to a barracks in progress. The slabs were heavy, and it took 2 people to carry one. It was terrible work. Soon the skin over my shoulder bone was cut and bleeding as the wood pressed down relentlessly. As Father and I were lowering the slab, the capo came over to me and punched me in the stomach. I doubled over. The capo reached down as if to give me another blow, but instead he slipped me the camera. Clutching my stomach, I quickly tucked it into its case and muttered to the capo, "Have you ever heard of pretending?" Surely his blows didn't have to be so real. We continued to work until mid-morning, when he ordered 3 pairs of us to follow him into the woods. He then pointed out 3 vats of alcohol that had been left under the trees. We picked them up and followed him to the clearing. Smoke seared our faces, and the stench of burnt flesh was so horrible I thought I'd faint. We marched up to one of the SS guards on duty and informed him that we had been ordered to pour extra alcohol over the fire, as it wasn't burning fast enough. The guard nodded and let us proceed. We threw the alcohol onto the blaze, and for one terrible moment I was forced to look into the pit. There I saw corpses of every size turning black from heat, and I realized that people I knew could be in there, that they were not just bodies, but each one a murdered human being, and I almost threw myself in with them. That was the closest I'd come to ending it all, which was strange, because it was supposed to be the moment I defied the Nazis and could once again feel like a human being. But what did it mean to be a human being? That we could do this to our brothers and sisters? Perhaps it would be better to resign from the human race altogether. It was my father who saved me. He came up behind me and spoke quietly. "Daniel, if we let them kill all those who still remember what it is to be human, what will be left?" Still, I wasn't convinced. I didn't care. "Daniel, if you jump, I'll jump after you." I knew he meant it. I couldn't be responsible for his death. I took the camera out of its case and made sure the exposure was such that the flames would look like bright white background, and the blackened bodies would show through clearly. I took 3 pictures before I put the camera back. Then I threw the rest of the alcohol into the pit and turned away, the blistering heat tearing through me. Our capo then marched us toward the Canada complex. To get there, we had to pass rows of people just off the transports and on their way to the gas chambers. I looked at all of them, women, children, old men, even healthy men, and I wanted to warn them that soon they'd be nothing but ashes. But I knew I'd be killed on the spot. So many SS, so many dogs surrounded them, and if any Canadian told them of their fate, the Canadian was thrown live into the crematoria fires. After all, Destruction on such a huge scale demanded that the victims know nothing. Even now, an SS officer was calling out, "Hurry, please. You'll be disinfected and have showers, and then you'll be reunited with your families in the camp. Make sure you fold your clothes neatly. Remember where they are so you can retrieve them after your showers. Hurry now, please." How could they imagine, these Jews from Hungary, what was in store for them? In fact, I believe it was only those of us who had been held in Poland who suspected the real truth. How could the others even imagine it? We were marched to Canada, where we returned the empty alcohol vats. With great authority, the capo marched us into various storehouses. I managed to take 3 more pictures. Any more would have been too dangerous. On the way back to the building site, I handed the camera over to the capo. He tucked it into his inside jacket pocket. As he did so, he gave me a wink, and then a kick. The wink wasn't much, but it lifted my spirits enormously. We'd pulled it off. I just prayed that they could get some of the photos out of the camp and into the hands of someone who could do something. Even now, the fiery image of that day stays burned in my mind. I will never, ever forget it. Chapter 12. I see Adam, fire in his eyes, determined. There he is again, blood slowly oozing from his wounds. It was only days after our picture taking that Adam hinted to me that the resistance was on the move. "We're planning something very big," he told me one morning. "Men have escaped to the Allies and told them of the gas chambers, and still they do nothing. Your photos may arrive too late to save this last batch of Jews, although you'll be glad to know that the fellow who escaped with them still hasn't been captured." The next morning, SS men on motorcycles roared up to the factories we were working in. Everyone was ordered back to the barracks, because Crematorium 4 was burning. It had been blown up, sabotaged. We marched back, heads held high. Later that day, we heard that most of the rebels had been killed, but not before killing a few SS guards first. That day, they gave us our rations when we got back to the barracks. Unheard of, really. After all, if someone should die before night, then those rations he'd eaten would be wasted. That was why rations were given only after a full day's work. They must have been very upset to forget that rule. I ate my quarter loaf of bread slowly throughout the day, not all at once as I usually did. And Father had some time for extra bartering. Father and I had quickly learned that if you simply ate your rations, worked, and followed orders, your lifespan would be a few months at the most. You would grow so thin and wasted that you would be chosen for the gas chamber in the regular selections the Nazis made. Father made sure that he kept up a brisk trade in the spoons and knives he made at the factory. New arrivals would trade him a slice of bread or something else he felt we needed. Sometimes he managed to get us potatoes, sometimes a bit of sausage, even some cheese. We were given 2 ounces of sausage 3 times a week, and 2 ounces of cheese on Sunday, and people would trade it if need be. Knives for cutting bread were very much in demand, as were spoons for the soup. Though only on Sunday did the soup have anything of substance in it, on other days it was brewed from weeds and thistles. Father kept us from becoming so weak and emaciated that we couldn't continue. The following day we were sent back to work as usual, the uprising easily contained by the SS. Our group was ordered to carry boxes of supplies from the yard to the factory. When we were out in the yard, Adam whispered to me, "All the others have been captured. They'll give me away under torture. I don't want to be caught and tortured. I won't give them the satisfaction. I'll have my revenge." I whispered back, "Adam, your revenge will be seeing them defeated. It can't be long now. They may not discover you. Don't do it." "I've made up my mind," he answered. "Good luck to you, Daniel. Remember me. And now, stay away from me." I could see that he would not change his mind, so I quickly moved away toward some crates. An SS man stood directing the unloading, his back to Adam. Adam moved up on him quickly, quietly, and pulled the guard's pistol from its holster before the guard could stop him. He shot the SS man at point-blank range, then turned around and fired at 2 more guards who were close by. He wounded one. The other killed Adam with a hail of machine gun fire. I crouched behind the crates, only too aware of the wild hatred this would instill in the SS guards. They would cheerfully massacre all of us in revenge. But no, for the moment they seemed occupied in getting medical help for the wounded guard who was still alive. In the meantime, the rest of our group slipped back into the factory and to our jobs. I couldn't stop my hands from trembling as I worked. I knew that, as punishment, they might well take Adam's work squad, line us up, and shoot us all. Or hang us publicly to make an example of us. There were often bodies hanging from the gallows as we marched to work. Still, I wasn't angry at Adam. I admired him. He had chosen his way to die. I took a deep breath. If the rest of us had to die for that act, then so be it. I stopped trembling, and I vowed that if they came for us, I would be shot fighting, too. But no one came, and our day continued as usual. That night, as we marched back to our barracks, I resolved to see Erica. Passing her twice a day and not being allowed to talk was unbearable. So the next day, I again made a note out of cloth and grease. It said fence, and I lobbed it at her as we went by at the end of the day. This time I saw her bend over and pick it up, pretending she had dropped her violin bow. After we had been given our rations, Father and I headed for the electrified barbed wire fence that separated the men's camp from the women's. We had to walk past 10 barracks, but finally we reached the fence. And there she was. We dared not get too close for fear of getting in trouble with the guards. But we called to each other. "I love you," Father called. "I love you too," she cried back. "Mother?" Father asked. She shook her head. "I won't make the next selection," she called. "But you two must. Also, we might be moved. There's a rumor. If you're moved, you won't have to go through the selection," I called. "Perhaps it'll be for the best. Try, Erica. Try." A capo from the barracks near where Erica stood rushed toward her. "Get away from there, you whore!" she screamed, swinging her club. Erica was fast. She moved too quickly for the blows to strike. But then she was gone. And Father and I melted back into the crowd of men at the barracks, not wanting to attract the attention of the guards. In my mind, I can see Erica. "Try," I had called to her. She was so thin, she couldn't have weighed more than 50 pounds. But her face had that particular spiritual glow that I knew so well, which had died for a while when she thought she was alone. Now just knowing we were alive had helped her. The next day, her spot was filled by someone else. My heart sank. Neither Father nor I knew what it meant. Had she been sent to the gas chambers, or moved out of the camp? That night I lay in my bunk, teeth chattering, head bursting with pain. I felt terrible. I was burning hot one minute, freezing cold the next. I had typhus. Father bribed the capo to let me stay in the barracks while I was sick. We all knew that being sent to the infirmary was usually a death sentence, because Nazi doctors were trained not to heal, but to select those too weak to work for death. I was delirious and in a fever for 5 days. Avoiding typhus was very difficult because we lived in the most horrific squalor. Our blankets crawled with so many lice that it often seemed like the blankets themselves were alive. They moved. We were allowed to wash once a day in a trickle of water, but the toilets were just long slabs of wood with holes in them, and they were always filthy and overflowing. We deloused and cleaned ourselves on our day off every other Sunday, but it made little difference. Still, I was lucky that Father had things the capo wanted. He took me off the work detail and allowed me to lie alone in the barracks all day. I dreamed of Mother in my delirium. It was strange. I had been so busy trying to stay alive, I'd had no time to mourn her death. But those 5 days were filled with her image. She scolded me for not wearing my overcoat when I was cold. She nagged me to eat some more coffee cake or noodle pudding. I had forgotten those things existed. She hugged me to her and told me she loved me. When I came out of my delirium and told Father, he said that she had been with me every moment of my illness, and that she had pulled me through. Her memory? I asked him. No, Daniel. Her spirit. She was with you, I just know it. I could feel her sometimes, late at night, when you were crying out. She would soothe you, and you would quiet down. I didn't know what to make of what Father said. He had never been religious. I don't think he used to believe in God. But if he felt Mother's presence, he must have believed in something. Why would this experience, which should make any sane person not believe in God, do the opposite to him? And yet, somehow, I felt he was right. I didn't know how I felt about God. After all, how could he let us suffer so? Still, somewhere inside me, I knew Mother had been with me. I came through my illness very weak, but feeling more at peace with myself than I had before. Perhaps Erica was right. We were here, and to despair was useless. And then I thought of Rosa. Thoughts of her washed over me in such a rush of pain and longing, I could barely stand it. As I'd done with Mother, I had tried to put her out of my head. But from then on, they both stayed with me as a reminder of good, and as a reminder that love still existed, even here. And then, about 6 weeks later, near the end of November, our capo rushed into the barracks, screaming, "Out! Out!" We were counted and marched out of the camp. The Russians were nearing. Before we left, the Nazis dynamited the gas chambers and the crematoria so that no evidence of them would survive. They gave us a quarter loaf of bread the day we marched out of Auschwitz, and that was all we ate for 3 days. At first, we marched 5 in a row, but quickly the line began to thin out, and it became apparent to the Germans that this was another way to kill even more of us. As soon as a prisoner fell, either from exhaustion or simply because he had tripped, he was shot. Bodies were strewn along the road. I realized that this march would kill most of us, that the escape from the gas chambers was not necessarily an escape from brutal death. We must concentrate on only one thing, I said to Father, putting one foot carefully in front of the other. Watch where you step. Don't allow yourself even to stumble. And that is what we did. Soon those who were too weak to walk begged for help, and everyone who could ended up supporting one another. I supported a boy just a year younger than I, who turned out to be from Lodz. His name was Peter. Of course, I asked him if he'd known Rosa, but he hadn't. From the moment we began to talk, we liked each other, and we quickly became friends. He had been in Auschwitz since the summer of 1944. Because of his blonde hair and blue eyes, he and his brother had been able to hide in one friend's house after another in Lodz, until finally they were captured just a few months ago and sent to Auschwitz. He too wanted to go to Palestine. He had trouble walking because his wooden clogs had created huge blisters on his feet and they had become infected. He could barely hobble along. Father had managed to get us soft material to go inside our shoes so that they didn't rub. This may have saved our lives on the march. We slept outside, when allowed to sleep, covered only by the blankets we carried. We were still in our prison uniforms, nothing more, even though it was only around 30 degrees and it often snowed or sleeted. At night, it went down to 5 or 10 degrees. After a week, we finally moved into a town and were loaded onto this train. Town folks looked right through us, as if we didn't exist. German civilians stood on the platforms waiting for trains. At least half, perhaps more, of our original number had been left behind on the roads, dead. When we got onto the trains, somehow Peter was put into a different car. I hoped we would meet up again, wherever we were going. The train chugs through Germany, heading west toward the Weimar region. We travel for days, again with almost no food. Both Father and I have become very weak. Finally, we are ordered off the train and are met by prisoners who assure us that we will be taken to have real showers and warmer clothes. We are marched to the camp. We pass through a gate over which a sign proclaims, "To each his due." We are led to a building to be disinfected. There, we are forced to strip and leave all our precious possessions behind. Father and I reluctantly part with our bowls, spoons, knives, and the warm cloth in our boots. and then we are put into a room to wait. We wait forever, it seems. Some faint. Finally, we are moved into another room, where we are shaved and again subjected to the torture of disinfectant thrown on our cut skin. Then a warm shower and new clothes. We are given jackets along with shirts, and I am grateful for this small mercy. Next, we are lined up and registered. When it is his turn, Father makes sure he stresses all the different kinds of work he can do. I do the same. I even tell them I'm a photographer. Where are we? I ask the inmate who takes down the information. Buchenwald, he replies. Part 4. Pictures